So, hi all, I'm Felipe. I'm the Global Director of Platform Partnerships at Usercentrics. And together with my colleague Mauricio, we're going to talk about scalable data privacy compliance, navigating multiple data privacy regulator frameworks with this. I think I need to talk with my marketing department about the titles of the presentation. I promise that it's going to be sexier than this. So let's start with something different. So essentially, does anyone know who this person is, who this guy is? He's French. There you go. So this is Philippe Petit. He's French in 1974. He and a couple of his, let's say, like colleagues or friends or people that he trusted, they managed to cross a wire across the Twin Towers in the World Trade Center in New York. And then he, for 1 hour, decided to cross the towers. This, of course, is not legal or was not legal at the time. He took a big risk, as well as the other people that helped him. There's a great story. There's a great documentary on Netflix/movie. It's an Oscar-winning documentary. I recommend it if you get a chance to see it. But the interesting thing is that once he did this, first he needed a group of people. He needed to trust people, right? He needed to trust the people that allowed him to get into the building. He needed to trust people that first they stayed in one tower on one side overnight. Then there were other people on the other side staying as well overnight. And then once the morning came, they shot a crossbow across the towers to hang on the wire. For this 1 hour, he did not only cross 1 hour, but he decided to make a performance. He's a performance, right? In the end, let's say, like, long story short, he stayed there 1 hour. Police came. The police got him. He got arrested, and his punishment, or his punishment in the end was he needed to do social work by entertaining kids in one of, like, in a rough neighborhood within the United States. But why am I showing this, especially particularly after I show the title of the presentation, and it's because I want to talk about trust. That's the first part of the conversation. And I wanted to introduce this concept. This concept was developed by a design consultancy from the Nordics called Design It. And essentially what they did was they didn't survey. They asked a couple of people from different fields, and they reached to two conclusions. First conclusion is that overall trust has been decreasing in the world, at least the impression of trust in the world. And second, that invisibility has been increasing. And if we put this in the context of technology, in the context of digital, we, like an individual, we can say, or we can feel that this is true. So just quick story, I bought a Google Wi-Fi router for my home to optimize my work from home setup. When I set it up, I noticed that I had 15 devices connected all the time. And this is for me, this is for myself, my wife, and my 1-year-old daughter. And I wonder, like, wait, what are all these devices being connected all the time? I gave permission for this, right? And because of this, because technology is being layered even in the daily lives, we have this concept of this idea of we're moving to the world of trusting invisibility. And it's the concept of trusting something and building transparency for the things that we do not see, right? And as with trust in general, trusting invisibility could be a little bit trickier, right? With trust, we know trust is mutual. You see another person or you see a company, then you start to generate a relationship with that particular company person, and then you generate trust. Trusting invisibility also requires and also has the characteristic of being mutual, right? It requires two sides, even if those sides are not clear to each other. Second, as with trust, trust is very emotional, particularly when you're not seeing trust. So invisible trust is highly emotional. It's irrational, right? It does not really require, there's not really a formula for it. It's more about the gut feeling. I can trust this particular person. I can trust this particular company. And lastly, I love this, which is the idea that trust is granted. Many times you can see, or if you even search on Google, it's like, oh, trust is earned, as if there was kind of like an agreement where you say, if I do this, I'm going to earn your trust. It's much more that if I do this, the other person or the other company will decide if they grant you that trust, right? Trust and invisibility does and has this particular requirement that it needs to be clearly granted, right? And I added this picture. This is a mother with 2 kids. As I mentioned, I have a 1-year-old daughter at home. And even when she was born, this is a human being that requires help for everything to survive. Even a baby, they do not trust their parents where they're born. You need to earn their trust, right? So I'm a recent father, so I have a lot of baby stories and baby questions to it. Anyhow, so why am I speaking, or why are we speaking about trust? Because at Usercentrics, we discovered and we realized that there is a very clear relationship between trust and privacy, right? And if you can see this, please ignore the fact that it looks like the flag of Scotland. But if you look at the chart, it's an interesting point where we see that the less amount of trust that you have, there's a higher willingness of privacy, right? And as you increase trust, then there is an increase or a decrease in the willingness of privacy for people. Again, put it in your own perspective, think about yourself. The more you trust a person, the less privacy you're going to require, or the less private you're going to be with that particular person. Now, changing gears a little bit and coming into being very specific about what we're speaking is, we know that the drivers that are changing the technology landscape, particularly on the privacy side, are threefold. We have regulatory changes, which is straightforward. There's new regulation regulating data privacy. Second, technology changes. Is it cookies? Is it not cookies? Is it something else? And lastly, we have user expectations. And for this part, I focus on user expectations because in this case, user expectations is very clearly saying that if trust is decreasing, if there is a decrease in trust, then there's an increase in the willingness of privacy. This means that for SMBs, particularly for our customers, demand is changing, right? There is a characteristic and there is a shift of demand and preference from the users and the clients of the SMBs that are consuming their products that can have ramifications for that particular set and for that particular group of people. Now, let's ground it into some numbers, right? So 81%, we got this from surveys for the past 2 years. It hasn't been updated post-pandemic full, so I can imagine that these numbers may be a little bit higher. But for example, if we put some numbers to it, we have that 81% of users say that in the past year, they've become more concerned about how the companies are using their data. We also have that 59% of consumers say that they're not confident that their privacy is being protected by companies whose products and services they use. We also know that 48% of people actually have stopped buying and using services from companies due to privacy concerns. And if we connect this within the relevance of seeing that the relevance of this group with the fact that only 17% of companies, especially SMBs, small and medium companies, are being data compliant and cookie compliant, this is a very grim outlook, right? What we're seeing and what we want to show is the idea that if users stop trusting companies, then they're going to stop buying from them. And if SMBs are not being on top of data compliance or not being on top of privacy, then there could be a potential massive shift of users that are currently using SMBs, right? That they go and they decide, actually, one of the reasons that I'm not or that I will stop buying from this particular company is because I don't trust it. Now, at Usercentrics, we have a mission of trying to enable the ecosystem, right, the privacy ecosystem, and establish this relationship of trust between companies, let it be large companies, let it be SMBs, and users. And what we discovered as well was that whenever a user goes to a particular website, they're thinking about these 4 or 5 questions in an instant, right? The first thing that they go is, now, do I trust this company? Second, what is this company doing with my data? Third, what are my general preferences? Fourth, what is my cultural, professional background to make a decision on data? Fifth, what do I know about data aggregation, if I know something? And what we've done in the past years was trying to get and understand those particular questions and trying to see how could we answer them in an easy way, at least have the first iteration of establishing this relationship of trust, or at least increasing the idea of trust. And what we discovered was that there's 3 steps and 3 things that can help companies solve this relationship of trust, particularly of invisible trust. So first, about transparency. So telling customers what you're doing. Second, about clarity, that the customer understands not only that you tell them what you're doing, but they understand what you're doing. And then lastly, as most important, connected to what I was mentioning about trust being granted, is that customers act in an informed manner. They will make a decision based on what you've told them, what they understand about what you're doing with your website, and then there's an increase of relationship in trust there. Yep. Now, we've looked at the different elements of trust, right? Trust is emotional, trust is mutual, trust is granted. Lastly, obviously, like trust in general is complex, right? Not necessarily invisible trust, but trust in general. So we have that there's the different layers of being emotional, being functional, being meaningful. And in our particular setting, in our particular environment, we have one additional complexity, which is it's being regulated, right? And it's not only us deciding what does the trust relationship mean, we have regulators creating certain rules to establish how should you create this trust with your users. So for this particular piece and for the next couple of slides, I'm going to pass it on to Mauricio to tell you a little bit about how these regulatory frameworks are affecting building of trust, and then how can you be able to navigate them easily.
Thank you, Felipe. So one of the topics that we wanted to mention today was the complexity that all these frameworks that Felipe was mentioning are coming into place into the industry, and what our partners are doing nowadays against that. Because every single year, we are going to have new frameworks coming out. We had already GDPR. We are having CCPA in the US. Every single state is trying to look into what framework are they going to implement now. Then we're having that spread down to South America. We're having that spread down now to Africa. So it starts getting tangled up around the whole world, and that's going to make data transfer so complex. And that's basically why we are here and what we're trying to solve. So what I wanted to do is just to put that complexity in a nutshell and give you the examples that we're getting from the partners and three very common examples that we have of data transferring. So here we have basically three bubbles. As you can see, the first one is a U person based in the U, scrolling through any of the websites. So this is the most common situation that we have, where we can see that GDPR is what has to be placed in that website and which is going to be the framework that this person is going to be seeing. So then it starts getting a little bit more complicated, because internally in Europe, now it's not only GDPR, but every single country is starting to look into their own interpretation of GDPR. So we have, for example, in France, Senate, which is, let's say, like an arm of GDPR. They're trying to implement the way that they're understanding the laws and what should be shown to French nationals in a French website. So then Germany wanted to do the same thing, Italy's following, and then it starts getting super complex internally in Europe. And then we go to an even more extreme case, which is where we play with nationality, where we play with region, and when we play with the websites. So we have a U person in Thailand navigating through US websites. So then it just gets completely complex, and web pages and web page builders do not know what banner should they be showing. Should it be GDPR? Should it be CCPA? What's going to be next? So to put it in a nutshell, there's three things that you have to focus on to answer those questions. So we have location, nationality, and the website origin, or the intent of that website. Who's the audience of my website? Technology-wise, we are able to solve two of these main pillars. So location, of course, location is going to be correlated with the IP address. So it's very easy because we can track where the IP is coming. If you're in the European Union, we simply show you GDPR banner. Same thing with the website origin. If you're .de, .sp, we know it's coming from Europe, and we can show it. But then the complexity comes into nationality. Legally wise, it says that if you're a European national, but you're in the US navigating any web page, you should be covered by GDPR. But that comes to be very complex because technology cannot know what nationality you're from. So as you can see, it starts tangling up completely, and there's a mismatch between what the technology can do and what the law is requiring in terms of data transferring. I wanted to give you this example of Sunil. I don't know if you have heard about it, but they're famous for one thing. Last year in 2021, they fined Google almost $150 million euros, just because when you go and when you're logging into Facebook or you're logging into Google Friends, the amount of clicks that a user would need to give consent was completely off than the amount of clicks that the user had to remove their consent. So to give the consent, it was just 1 click. To remove all the consents, you had to do at least 3 or 4 clicks. By law, that's illegal. They went after Google, and they were fined. Complexity, as you can see, has all of the scales around. So it has the technology, it has the law parts, but then there's more of the data transferring that we need to be solving. So we have here on the first part, the user complexity. So it's like the distrust that a web page is giving the users, and they opt out to go to a competitor that is way more clear in their banner when it can just be clicked, and I'm seeing what is going to be the consent that I want to give that web page. So there's a lot of mistrust now in the industry that is making them go to a competitor. You have regulatory and marketing complexity, and that's the example that I was giving you between the disparity of technology and what the law is requiring. So it's incredibly, incredibly complex, the way that we're moving. And finally, infrastructure complexity, because we have website builders that want to have a banner and a GDPR, and they want to make their final users compliant, but then we have to find a way to embed their technology into what we have and do it through like an API integration. What are we doing right now, and what is the future of it, and where are we going? I don't know if you've heard that Google was trying to eliminate third-party cookies. That's something that is a challenge for us, and we need to be like water. We need to be modifying, and we need to be seeing what the industry is going to be asking. So right now, we're in the compliance space. That's why we never say that we are a cookie management, because cookies can be eliminated at any point. So we need to be more of a compliance and see what's going to move the industry. UX and activation. UX, we are pushing a lot because we do understand that the cookie banner is something that is very outdated, and it needs to be way more understood, and there has to be a different framework than just clicking accept all, delete all. It can be very confusing. So that's the future of it, where we're going to see how is that transfer data and how is that trust going to be won from the user simplicity. Finally, what do we do and why are we here? Usercentrics, we have over 3,000 partners. We're very lucky to have here main website builders that we have partnered up with. We've reached already over 1 million websites where our banner, cookie, and consent management banners are showing up. We have 61 million consents per day, 61 million consents that we're receiving per day from all the sessions in these websites. Finally, we've been able to grow to more than 250 employees. We're very proud of that. I think it's been a great work that we've done. But all of that is thanks to our partnerships. So why are we here? We've been able to partner up with Duda, Mono, Generation, Thermodon, and they trust our technology, and they trust that we are able to solve that complexity that I just talked about. They're website builders. We're able to go through an API, which is very seamless. We can deliver the banner into thousands of websites. Basically, they don't need to go into that complexity. We fix it. We're able to integrate through API. And it's basically our goal to be able to deliver it and handle the problem from ourselves and be able to make the final user compliant and solve that complexity that we have. That would be it from our sides. Happy to open the space, and thank you very much for having us here again.
Thank you, Felipe. Thank you, Mauricio.
Thank you.
So, any questions from the floor? Yeah, there's a kind of, I don't know what's this tone, but I have one. Obviously, I could have several, but I think we heard yesterday about the evolution of technology and the metaverse, and all these things that are developing also a side of the universe that we know. And we see all the potential that it brings for enhanced advertising and so on. How do you guys envisage that giving consent not only to things we know, but to other universe, other currencies, and what about the digital identity that people are going to have on that?
Love the question. I was actually talking yesterday about blockchain and the smart contracts. We know that when you click accept cookies or reject all cookies, it's basically a contract that we are giving to the web page to manage our data. I do hope to see that development inside the blockchain, where in the future we're going to be able to do that through a smart contract, where we clearly know and are visible to be able to see what is the consent that I begin to what web page. But I'm also very curious how that's going to develop in the blockchain.
Yeah. Another question that I would have, and which is probably related to the audience here, is that when you're talking about users, it's pretty much in a B2C environment, right? What about the, how do you envisage the consent management in a B2B or in a B2B2C environment, as people here are mainly dealing with business customers?
Yeah, so that particular question, I think we touched a little bit in the end, which is from our side and what we're trying, how we're trying to help businesses that are working with businesses, is to work or to use or to take the approach of technology, right? So from a CMP perspective, we need to offer, Dura was mentioning about web vitals and speed. So this is a factor that affects speed. So we need to have the best solution that improves speed, that makes sure that speed is not being affected. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to align with what is important for both the platforms, the businesses, the agencies, and then the SMBs, for them to deliver the idea and what I was mentioning at the beginning, the idea of trust to an end user. So if you deliver both sides of the coin, then the user is trusting, but then it makes sense for a business to say, I'm going to implement it, I'm going to build, I think there's a strategy that I can build beyond just putting a cookie banner there.
So I've seen the whole presentation you've done, and I think that on a business perspective, from your perspective, what you're doing is extremely, it makes sense, and you're trying to create the best product for the users and everything. I see that from the user's perspective, and that could be tested, how many people really really read those conditions. So even though you are doing everything in a very conscious way to build a trust, everything, I think that between you, cert data, or whatever the other provider, people won't see the difference because nobody's reading it. It's like when you have a user guide, only 3% read user guides before launching a TV, using a phone or whatever. That's why they created the quick setup thing. So do you have a measure, that's my question, do you have a measure of how many people really read your condition, which means they open it, they read which cookies, and really activate that within the 60 million a day? Do you know what is the percentage of people really effectively doing that instead of just saying accept all and not reading?
Yeah. So we don't have the exact number, but I can tell you that one of the factors that affect this is, for example, nationality. So Germans, they're very good and very dedicated at doing this. Maybe there's some different preferences in some of the other countries. So there's a lot of factors that affect how a user interprets and wants to take action on the privacy. And as I mentioned as well at the beginning, if privacy is being regulated, so it's being dictated by regulation, that it's very unsexy. So like from a user perspective, it feels like I'm reading something. But from our perspective, what we're trying to do is, we know that the cookie banner is the first iteration, right? Particularly of consent. What we're trying to do is we're trying to solve the cookie banner by changing completely, by even removing the cookie banner. That's actually how we're envisioning the next 3 to 5 years of our company, and it's very focused on what does it make sense for the user without obviously going into the realm of nudging or making sure that we're not manipulating that relationship of trust that the business is trying to build.
Okay, I think we have one more question. Yeah.
So you mentioned that Google will stop using cookies. What are your plans on how you would react to that? And in general, there's a lot of change in the regulations. So how do you keep up with that?
Yeah, so from a regulation perspective, we're about 250. We have a big team of lawyers within the company. that are constantly on top of the regulation. So that is also as well part of kind of like the service that we offer to small companies and then to the larger companies that are serving companies, which is, this is very hard and very specific for a company to take on as a business. So the legal part and the regulations, we're on top of this, that's part of our business. And then second, in terms of the things that are changing, we mentioned regulation, we mentioned user expectations, and we mentioned technologies. But what we're seeing is even if technologies changes, even if it's cookies or if it's not cookies, the idea on consent is here to stay, right? And even if it takes the form of identity as well. If you are the one that will own the data and then make a decision of the data, even if your own data then becomes a currency in order to open up or move things. So we're moving into the realm of consent and focusing on consent rather than just necessarily saying like it's third-party cookies or it's other type of technology.
Well, thank you very much. And you guys are around, you have a booth over there and you'll stay around for the whole day. So if you have other questions, feel free to reach out to the Usercentrics team.
I would love to say to visit our booth and we're going to be there, but we're usually not there. We're walking around, so feel free to approach.
You're going to be at dinner, so
sure.
you can meet you guys there. Thank you very much, Felipe. Thank you, Mauricio.